Good evening, good evening, good evening. How are you doing today?
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
They're nervous a little bit. Now, it is strange to me as I get ready to introduce us how college professors can be so nervous when they're on live. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I am happy to have all of you here with us today. We are here with Incarceration to Incorporation, Julius Hall, AB, Marie. And what we love to do is we are grateful for this platform that Julius Hall has given to us. All things relevant media, and also for the brainchild of Incarceration to Incorporation by AB. And we have Marie, she's our co-host as well, and we have a wonderful show for you tonight. We are going to talk about education, the key that opened doors for returning citizens. And so before I even go a little further and ask them to introduce themselves, Marie, Julius, you want to say something?
Ladies first.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Hello, I just want to say thank you for tuning in tonight to ATR Media. This is going to be a good show tonight. We have two, like Julia said, we have two college professors on, Ms. Margaret and Jonathan. And so we want you all to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and a brief introduction about your profession.
Okay. And we are glad to have you, Jonathan and Margaret. And we started this platform so that we can get the word out that for returning citizens that there are other resources that they can attach themselves to. That and this is just one segment of it with education. We're happy to have y'all here. We want to be a platform or resource to these people when we come home, that they won't have no hope, that there is some hope. As y'all can see, I'm running for mayor, but it's kind of iffy now. I've been in court all day they're trying to disqualify me because of that. because I am a returning citizen, and they're saying that I haven't been home long enough. So it's just we want to give hope to those returning citizens that you need to be a productive person when you come back home, that you need to be engaged in your community, and that don't give up. You can do anything, and you can go anywhere from where you are. And we're just happy to have y'all. Our other host, Alexander Anthony Barnes, AB, we call him, is not here tonight, but he's busy. So we're just happy to have y'all to give this information, and it's another outlet that these people, when we return home, that we can know where we can get information that to help us succeed instead of failing and going back into the system. So thank y'all.
All right.
Oh.
Thank you. Should we introduce ourselves now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll go first. I am Margaret Baldwin Pendergrass. I teach in the Department of Theater and Performance Studies at Kennesaw State University, just north of Atlanta. And I'm a theater maker. I mainly playwriting and directing, occasionally performing. But I've been working with system impacted writers for about 3 years now, 3 or 4 years. And I'm just been really taken by the work, taken by the people that I've met, and particularly the opportunities to connect my students who are undergraduate students at Kennesaw with returning citizens and people who have been system impacted, and just seeing the incredible things that happen in the classroom. So that's me.
Professor Jonathan?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, I am Jonathan Shelley. I am an assistant professor of English at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York. I'll go ahead, though, and tell everyone what I was before that, because that sort of connects a little more to my work with incarcerated individuals before I became a professor at St. John Fisher College, which I just got done with the first week of being a professor there. I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, and I was a teacher, tutor, and site coordinator with the nonprofit organization Common Good Atlanta, which provides higher education opportunities and classes for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated persons. So I'm coming from a little afar today, but I have roots in the work that's going on in Georgia.
Okay, so thank you for that introduction. And I think somebody may still have a little echo on their phones. But what I want to talk about is, first of all, I saw what Professor Margaret said. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to incarceration. How did that begin? And the reason why we're asking that question, because here the platform is Incarceration to Incorporation, where we give a platform to change the narrative. And when I say change the narrative, what I'm primarily speaking of is when many returning citizens come home, most news features them as returning right back, recidivism being high. But that is not the case in many of our stories. So what we want to do is we want to give as many returning citizens the platform to share their stories. And so what we're talking about tonight, education, and the key that opened doors for returning citizens. We want you to tell us, how did you become involved with returning citizens?
All right. Jonathan, you want to go first?
Oh, I'll go. Okay, you're turning the tables on me. For this.
I'm turning the tables, yeah.
I'll answer this question, Julius, by going back a little bit, because getting involved with returning citizens actually kind of started in a way where I wasn't actually doing any teaching in prisons, but I was aware of it as something that was happening. So I went to graduate school at UC Berkeley, where I got my PhD. And at the time there was a strong link between the graduate program at UC Berkeley, and a lot of graduate students would go and teach as part of the Prison University project at San Quentin, which is now called Mount Tamalpais College. I believe it has changed its name recently. I myself never taught as part of or in the Prison University project, but I had many friends and many acquaintances who did. And I only mention that because I actually think just the awareness of these kinds of programs and the awareness of these kinds of efforts was very important for me to thinking about this kind of work and realizing that it was going on and realizing that I had the potential to be involved in it and possibly contribute to it. When I actually started doing work with incarcerated persons was when I moved to Atlanta to be an instructor at Georgia Tech. And when I took that position, it was very important to me knowing that I had a limited contract to teach at Georgia Tech. And it was very important to me to feel like I was a member of the community, that I was contributing to the community. And I kind of wanted to be able to do that somewhat effectively and I guess, to put it one way, very quickly, or as quickly as I could. And so I was this sort of newly minted doctor, PhD from California, and I wanted to teach, and there were opportunities through Common Good Atlanta to teach in the prisons in Atlanta. So that's when I got involved in that work, and then the teaching I primarily did while I was in Atlanta was at Metro Reentry Facility, which was a facility that most, if not nearly all, of the students there were on schedule to be released at some within a year to 2 years. So it was very natural that meeting them as students at that facility, I would continue to be able to stay in touch with them and work with them upon release as well. So that's sort of my full arc of how I started teaching inside the prisons, but then have been able to continue the work with returning citizens as well.
Professor Margaret?
Yes. So I think the spark was actually, I was thinking about this when you sent the questions, Julius. It was an encounter, a sort of chance encounter. I'd heard of, there's, in the theater community, there are Shakespeare Beyond Bars. There's all sorts of things that are in that sort of using the arts and particularly theater in non-theatrical spaces. And I've done a lot of that. I've been doing theater for about 30 years and I've been doing theater in strange spaces and with people who aren't, who are in the community. And I love that work. And I'd done one stint doing a few workshops at Lee Arundel State Prison, working with women. And but then that had sort of gone away. And but my husband and I were one Saturday we were sitting on our porch, we were having a supper, and a young African-American man walked by, and we waved at him and said hello. And then he kept walking, and then he walked back. And he came up in our driveway and he just started to tell his story. And he had been released like the day before and had basically walked through the whole night because he didn't have anywhere to go and he didn't have any resources. And that encounter with this young man, it really hit home for both me and for my husband, who after that, I think it was after that, it may have been connected. It's all kind of blurry now. But he became part of Common Good Atlanta and became involved with Common Good Atlanta as a volunteer. And that was right about the time. Common Good Atlanta is a not-for-profit organization that is focused on democratic access to higher education for those who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And so he became involved with that, and they were starting to open up classes at Metro. And about that same time, I was directing the play Our Town. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but it's a sort of classic American play about a community. And I I don't know, we started talking, but we basically brought some of my students to come do a joint performance, just a reading, one afternoon, reading of one of the famous scenes from that play, with the men at Metro, who were in the Common Good Atlanta class. And it was such a profound experience and such a profound exchange, and so much fun. And that really, it was some of these experiences that I've had in these spaces, and this isn't to discount the difficulties of the people who inhabit those spaces, but just that exchange and that joy of learning and the discussion and the dialogue, it felt like it really created a sense of community, and that stayed with me. And then thinking about how do we create more bridges for those who, when they are released, how can we use the arts? How can we use the literature? How can we use theater, which brings people together, to create that kind of welcome space?
Okay.
That's great. I had a question. Are y'all, any one of you still in touch with the students that you all might have taught?
Yes.
I'll say
Yes.
awesome, because if that, especially if they have some success stories that we want to motivate others by, if y'all can send them to us here, or contact me, Julius or Marie, and we can put them on here so they can tell those stories, because that's motivation for somebody else to want to do better and to want to do good. So that'd be great. And maybe Margaret, you can do a play on my life, and
Sure.
and
Well, we are doing, so I am teaching right now with Common Good Atlanta, a class called The Odyssey Finding Home. And that was the one that I first taught at Metro, but using the story, the sort of the outline of the story of the Odyssey, and this epic story about a flawed hero trying to find his way home, as the inspiration for personal narrative and poetry. And so I've been teaching that course now for about 3 years. And right now we're doing it with returning citizens through Common Good Atlanta. And we have a performance coming up in a couple of weeks, which I'm excited about. But yeah, so that work is continuing.
I don't know whether you'll be able to put my book in your play. You have to condense it so much. But I also write poetry too. That's going to be my second book, which I'll be starting on in a couple of weeks.
Great.
And I've been writing poetry since high school, so I'm gonna have a book of poetry also. My first book is not out yet, but it is at the publisher now. So
Excellent.
I'll send Julius. Make sure I send Margaret a copy.
And speaking of high school, I was looking at a note that said, let me read this note because I thought this was very important. Most incarcerated people are dropouts, with more than half of them lacking a high school education. The lack of education does not in and of itself reduce crime, but it is highly correlated with our social problems. I thought that was key because there were some stats that I saw that said about 41% of those that are incarcerated do not have a high school or a GED or a diploma. Can you speak to that from your perspective?
Well, I can speak to it from the perspective of having done for the last same sort of time period. I've been involved with some projects working with the Department of Juvenile Justice and their school system, and doing some theater projects working with the Metro Regional Youth Detention Center, and now we're starting to expand it. But I was thinking about that today, is thinking about how so many of the young people that we've worked with said that they didn't have any engagement with school before. They didn't like school. They just didn't have any spark connected to it, and that it was actually not until they were incarcerated that they began to take any sort of interest in school. And so I think that, when you talk about changing the narrative, Julius, to me, that is that is a really big part of it, is this idea of literacy and agency, and you know, being able to feel like your story matters, and that you have access to it. And I think and to see themselves in, you know, in the world of literature and education is also really important. So I think it's essential that way. That how do we create those spaces where it's cool to learn, where it's interesting to learn, and where we're breaking, you know, that prison, you know, school to prison pipeline.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that term, and we need to define that. And I want you to in a moment, Professor Margaret. But Professor Jonathan, in your dealings with men and maybe women that are incarcerated, when they came, was there an educational barrier, or those that came to you had pretty much had a stable education, high school or GED?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the classes that I have taught in the facilities in Georgia, it was a requirement for students to either have a high school diploma or a GED to enroll in these courses. So having said that, you know, many of them have, you know, would be the first to be taking some sort of college classes in their family. Or, you know, they would talk about not graduating from high school and having to get their GED while incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, so I will say that my experiences have been one in which students have been credentialed with either a diploma or a GED when I have taught them. But I mean, having said that, you know, I want to put it this way. You know, at the colleges and universities I've taught many students who, you know, have never been, say, at risk of incarceration, or have lived lives in which it was never in doubt, or that they would graduate high school. Having said that, you know, them having that high school diploma doesn't necessarily guarantee that they are always the most inspired students going into college. And so I only bring this up to say that I would really never want someone to think that sort of their previous work is any kind of statement about their potential going forward, if that makes sense. I think that a lot of times people overassume that they need to have some sort of like extensive familiarity or some sort of extensive formal training, whatever that takes, whatever form that takes, in order to be successful at this next thing. And that's something that I would never want anyone to get hung up on in terms of pursuing some sort of avenue, or pursuing some kind of effort in terms of learning or in terms of education.
Gotcha. Marie, you got something you want to share?
Yes, Jonathan, I just want to ask you a question first, Jonathan, and then Ms. Margaret, you can answer. Jonathan, do you think that education of people who are in prison and are released from prison reduce the recidivism rate? And if so, how is that proven?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this in two ways. The first way that I'll say it is I do, and the reason I do is I heard someone say this the other day, and I just thought it was really great. I should start by saying, I mean, I've taught humanities to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated persons. So things like English, literature, history, not so much like math or science or other kinds of maybe STEM, as we might say, or kind of technical fields. And when someone, and as I was discussing with some people the other day, like, what is the importance of humanities? Because there's lots of debates had about, like, is it important to read novels? Is it important to read poetry these days? Like, you can't, it's harder these days to go out and, like, make money, like having read a lot of novels or maybe having read a lot of poetry. So there's I think, intense but not undue questions about what's the value of doing these things if they're not necessarily going to guarantee me a job or something. And the answer that someone said that I thought was really great is that the humanities may not teach you how to, like, you know, succeed in a particular 9 to 5 or to operate some kind of machine that can guarantee you a paycheck, but that the humanities essentially teaches you character. So it teaches you means with which to do things. And means here is, in a sense, a kind of attitude to have towards things, a kind of outlook to have towards things that you do, I think, in your everyday life and that you might kind of do in your professional life. So that's like, so for me, that's the power of the humanities, is almost its kind of non-specific reach. The fact that in many ways you could argue it doesn't do anything specific for people, but in the way that it doesn't do anything specific for persons, it helps them in their entire lives. In getting these kinds of lessons, or just this kind of experience that can have so doing something that can change your outlook in a whole kind of life way, that to me rests at the very core of, say, its ability to reduce recidivism or really change people when they are released from prison.
Okay, Miss Margaret.
I go back to the idea of the story. What's your story? And thinking about there was a educator sort of named Paulo. I'm going to say his name wrong because I never know how to say it. Paulo Freire, who is Brazilian, who really talked about this idea of literacy as agency, and literacy not just like, okay, you know the vocabulary, but that you can also act on, you can be in charge of your own world that way. And he has this statement that is that I learned that I keep thinking of all the time, not just for students that I'm working with who have been system impacted, but really all my students, is the idea that to claim your world in your own words. No, I'm sorry. Let me say that again. To name your world in your own words is to claim your world. And I feel like that sort of that confidence and encouragement is really what is at the heart of education for those who have not had access to it, or who have been oppressed, or who maybe have been told that they're not worthy of that. And so that for me, what I try to do in these spaces is kind of demystify this idea that, you know, a college course is something that is special. It's a special space if we make it that way. But it in itself doesn't have value unless the individuals bring that sense of connection to it. So I've seen the statistics and I believe them, that yes, you know, people who have had education while incarcerated, that the rate of recidivism goes down dramatically. I don't know how that happens, but I know that when I'm in the room, whether it's a virtual room like we're in now with the Common Good Atlanta Downtown class, or when I'm in, you know, the room at Metro Reentry Facility, that curiosity and that hunger and that desire to learn is palpable. And it is something that excites me as an educator. I can't think of a better space to be in.
Marie, that was an awesome question that helps me to segue into what I'm getting ready to say now, especially how Professor Margaret stated, literature or literacy. But before I ask you this question, we got a few guests that's on right now. Brett Campbell is watching, and he says, changing someone's outlook builds vision for them. Changing someone's outlook builds vision for them. And I love that quote. We also have Kayla Brockington watching, and my friend Tree is on as well. But what I want to ask is, why literature? Why literacy? There are so many different areas that can, number one, influence but also number two, that can change a person's outlook or perspective. Why did you use literature? And that's number one. And then number two, what literature do you use? Because the demographics of prison is it varies. It's multifaceted. So do you believe that one fits all, if you will, or are you using different literary devices?
Oh wow! Oh, me first. These are great questions, Julius, and I will say they're great because I don't necessarily think they're easy questions to answer, and by that I mean I think they sort of require complex answers, which is what I like about them. So why literature? This is a really good question, and one that I guess maybe I'm stalling for time by doing all this, but the reason why I'm doing that is because I find my answer constantly changing because I don't necessarily know that I always have a definitive answer. But I'll tell you what I keep coming back to, and I'll explain it in a couple of ways. For me, literature, and I think almost by this, I'm going to just give a definition to literature of something like fictional writing or imaginative writing, to maybe distinguish it from other forms of just writing or things you could read, like the back of a shampoo bottle is not literature because it doesn't have this sort of imaginative or fictional character. But what I really think it is for me is that literature truly allows you to inhabit other positions and other perspectives that you yourself may not in your own day-to-day existence in life. And in this way, I think that literature is a kind of serious play. I mean, it is a place where you can go and you can experiment and you can follow these routes and you can follow these journeys with these people, but you're also doing it in a very concerted and concentrated way. I mean, I think there is and I'm going to sound very sort of fancy and maybe pretentious here, but I do think there's a difference between the kind of play, imaginatively, psychically, mentally, that one gets to do reading a text or reading a piece of great literature versus what happens when we watch film or watch TV. That is not to say that I don't think watching TV or watching film can be important exercises or great critical exercises. But I do think that literature specifically requires a level of engagement, or if not requires, I think it just creates a level of engagement and a level of inhabitation that is very important and has the ability to radically change or radically change vision. To use some of the terms that we've already heard today, and that it's the kind of depth that it provides. I just want to give like one practical example that happened in the last class I taught before I moved out of Georgia. Was we read this text by Samuel Hurston Barracoon, which is about this man named Cujo Lewis, who's one of the last known survivors of the transatlantic slave trade, and oftentimes, and it's a series of interviews with him, and so it's a firsthand account of his experience being enslaved in the United States, and then becoming a free man. But it was often brought up, the students often brought up that this had the feel of news in that it was a true account of things, but that it was better than CNN or it was better than Fox News. And one of the things we kept coming to was the way in which reading this account essentially forced you to go slower than it did sort of watching the news and kind of having things rapidly said to you. And I think that ability to slow down and really kind of, like really soak in an experience or someone else's experience essentially is really vital to what makes literature work. And what makes literature able to have the change effect that it can really have.
My turn? That one's hard to follow, Jonathan. So I think I agree with what you say about being able to have somebody else's experience, or that to me, it's mostly about empathy. particularly in the world of theater, that it gives us a chance, whether you're, taking on a role or you're just in a space where there's that live performance. It's a way to empathize with others. And to me, it's also a place where we can examine our humanness in all its dimensions, even the dimensions that are, really hard to look at. But that there is that it creates space for us to encounter the other, however you describe the other, and to break down those barriers when it works. It can also have the opposite effect. But in terms of your question, Julius, about, what types of literature, I think it's really important to have a wide range of voices, and diverse voices in all aspects of the word diverse. One thing that I've really enjoyed this summer was I co-taught this Odyssey class with also a lecturer at Kennesaw State, Matt Curry, who is also a poet. And he was able to bring in a lot of contemporary poetry, particularly poetry by African-American poets, and sort of thematically responding to some of the themes of the Odyssey. And there's something really great about that sort of that exchange of, we've got this really old story that has some, very compelling parts, but there's also some really boring parts. There's really problematic parts. And then also these contemporary voices that are speaking to their own experience of what it is to be human. And that dialogue is really interesting to me. And also as hearing the students, hearing the writers' own voices coming out and sharing their stories, that's where the magic happens for me. So I'm interested in using old stories as a way to sort of speak to what is mythic, what is shared between us, the shared stories, in order to find that story within.
Can I add something to that about sort of selections of text that you brought up, Margaret? And I want to bring this up because you, Julius, asked about what specific text do you go to? And I think Margaret answered that really excellently when she said, I think it's very important to have a wide variety of voices. And I want to bring this up because I wrote my dissertation about Shakespeare. I specialize in Shakespeare. And so when people talk to me and I tell them, I've done work with incarcerated persons, or I've taught classes in prisons and everything, they always naturally gravitate to oh, you must have taught Shakespeare in prison. And there is a long, and don't get me wrong, there is a long history of Shakespeare being taught in prison. And there's an extensive amount of literature about why Shakespeare is the best literature to teach in prison. I don't know if I agree with all the things said, but I just wanted to say that the experiences, and Margaret, I'm going to bring you in on this because we've taught together and some of the things. I mean, I've had just as much success teaching, say, a Shakespeare play as I have teaching a play by Christopher Marlowe, who's a contemporary of Shakespeare's, but not sort of as well known, as I've had just as much success teaching and seeing students work with a play by Lorraine Hansberry, A Raisin in the Sun. So in terms of selections, I just want to sort of say here, I am not a person who has particularly strong affinities to particular authors. I'm not one who believes that there's a single author who kind of holds the key to everything. I think there are people who believe that. I am not one of them. But I just wanted to reiterate Margaret's point that I think the wide variety of voices is absolutely important. And this goes, at least for me, to just the idea of being able to inhabit a wide variety of experiences and trying to expand that as much as possible.
Okay. Marie?
Yes, sir.
You have another question.
Yes, I do. Miss Margaret, do you know, are there any apprenticeship or internships away for formerly incarcerated women or men to obtain significant income to be self-reliant? And what type of apprenticeship or internships have more successful for people re-entering the workforce with their incarceration background?
That's a great question. I am in the arts, and so most of the internships that I know of don't pay very well, to be honest. And in fact, that's become a point of real reexamination in the arts community, particularly the theater community, that you have to be able to pay people a living wage and not just use interns as sort of free labor. Um, with that said, I do feel like there are spaces, and I know that at Common Good Atlanta they've talked about the working with people who have been system impacted and trying to find pathways for employing them. I'm in my world of education, and where I'm focused is creating internships for undergraduates who are at KSU. But I feel like the richest experiences, the richest learning experiences are those where the people who are like Julius, what you're doing with the life navigation, that you have a wisdom, you have an understanding that I could never bring to that job. And I think it's really important to value that that wisdom, and to find ways to employ people to bring their wisdom to the situation and to the classes. So I'm hoping that as Common Good Atlanta continues to grow and sort of fill out in terms of its structure, that there will be opportunities for those who have completed the Clementi course, which is a course, Jonathan, you could probably talk more about it, but it's actually so students who through Common Good Atlanta take the Clementi course cycle. It's a 5-unit course that includes philosophy, literature, American history, art history, and critical thinking and writing. And when students complete the whole course, they can earn, it's all free to them, but once they completed the course, they can earn up to 6 hours of college credit. And so that is a way to help sort of, take a little bit of the barrier away in terms of connecting to further higher education. But then also having students who have been through those courses become mentors for other students is something that I think is ideal. And it's just a matter of figuring out the structures for that and supporting it. I know that there's more and more awareness at the collegiate level and at the university level of how important it is to have those sort of opportunities and to break down those barriers. The action in terms of creating the infrastructure for that, I think is still very new in a lot of places. So that's not a very specific answer, but that's what I got so far.
Can I add to that, Margaret? I mean,
Sure.
I really appreciate the question, because I'm going to put all my cards on the table and say I don't have a great answer for it. Like, I could not name any places that I know of just off the top of my head that have an internship that pays that would work like this. But I appreciate the question, because it does make me realize I think this is the thing to start thinking about next, which is to say that education is certainly like reading great books and that kind of thing. But I do think kind of the next part for, say, programs that Margaret or I involved in is thinking about education in terms of like making very concrete, tangible connections to the next thing that they can go and say, take credits that they've received and being able to kind of parlay that into, say, entrance into some sort of degree program, or be able to use the work there, be it writing or something, into some kind of some kind of occupation that might involve some kind of writing or something like that. And again, I think with the question, I very much say this is reminding me that I think this is the kind of next step for some of us who are doing these educational programs to really be thinking about, that we can never get too comfortable just being proud of ourselves, say for like, go read Dickens, go read Wordsworth, you know, like go read all these books like that. And in some ways that's good, but it's not enough, and we do need to. So I love the question.
I want to add to that because actually minds are changing here in Savannah. Savannah Tech has an awesome program for returning citizens. If you go to Savannah Tech's website and you look up programs, there are multiple listings of different degrees, and it's free because they were given a grant for returning citizens. And so that's here in Savannah State, Savannah Tech.
What's the name of the grant?
I don't know that. I don't know that. But it's easy. All you do is go to Savannah Tech's website on Google it and put in programs, and a whole list will come up with whatever type training or trade that you want, and they pay for it. But not just Savannah Tech. And I hear you, Miss Barbie. There is some feedback, so I don't know where that's coming from right now. And Tisha, we welcome you also to the show. But I have a question that was asked by a young man that's in prison in Washington, and I mean Washington State, not Washington State Prison. His question to both of you is, do you have the capacity to partner with new education programs on the inside that are structured on a peer-to-peer educational platform?
You mean the technology to do that, or I guess I'm
no,
not sure.
No, I think he mean, will you be willing, whether it's your organization, Common Good Atlanta, or you're in New York, Professor Shelby, or other colleges, would they be willing to partner with educational programs inside of prisons, whether they're in Washington, Georgia, New York? How do they get in touch with you to be able to facilitate that type of collaboration?
Yeah. Well, I think the best resource for getting in touch with programs is probably the Alliance on Higher Education in Prison, which is, and they have a website. If you Google, I should know it off the top of my head, but I don't. But if you Google the Alliance on Higher Education in Prison, they have a very thorough collection and database of college prison education programs across the nation. I do think one of the things I will say to this question is that higher ed in prison tends to be organized quite locally, which is to say that educators or institutions in a specific area tend to serve or service the prison facilities or provide them with educational classes or in the area. So just to give like an example, as you know, Common Good Atlanta called on faculty from Georgia Tech, Kennesaw State, Emory University, University of Georgia as the people who went to the prisons in Georgia to teach. I can just tell you, I haven't actually I've only been here for like half a month, so I haven't gotten too involved yet. But just as another example, here in New York, I know that, for example, here in Rochester, the University of Rochester, Cornell University, these are all universities in New York, the City University of New York system, the State University of New York system, like SUNY Buffalo, and these kinds of institutions. They're usually the ones that are they're the ones that are providing classes to facilities here in New York State. So with that, I mean, there are certainly colleges and universities in Washington State, the University of Washington, which I attended for a little bit, Washington State, I think that these are places that might have those connections. Just so I mean, I don't know who asked the question, but I'll certainly give out my email at the end. If you email me, well, I can't promise that like I myself can provide like any kind of class or anything, because I think it is very hard to create those kinds of connections when there's geographic distance. I'm more than happy to help facilitate the research for that, either looking at the Alliance on Higher Education Prison website myself and letting you know what I find, or showing you where to look on that. So, but this is good too. And Julius, we've talked about this, I think, previously as well. I mean, I think like one of the really important things is this kind of networking that needs to happen, which is to say there are a lot of programs and they exist, and I think a lot of them are doing incredible work. I don't actually think it's wrong to say that a lot of these programs don't know each other, and a lot of these programs don't necessarily know what's happening in one place or another. And some of that just has to do, again, with the kind of specific local character or local spirit or just kind of local organizing that each of these programs does. But the resources are out there to make the connections that I think the question is asking for and asking about.
Yeah, the only thing I have to add to that is that I feel like there's even more awareness now. I mean, the whole Second Chance Pell Grant Act has come around. There's more. It feels like there are more resources, more universities, like our university at KSU has just started the Rise Institute for Social Equity. So I feel like in the next 5 years, it's going to be a lot less siloed, these opportunities. And also the kinds of questions that you're asking and on this program about resources for returning citizens, we found even just in starting the downtown class and doing the class this summer through Zoom, it has changed it, but it's also meant that we could have people from different parts of the state Zoom into the class, whereas if we had been on site somewhere, those people wouldn't have been able to be part of it. So I think there's a lot of hope coming in terms of different opportunities for different ways of teaching these classes and collaborating. I don't know if we're going to have classes that someone from Washington State can do. The timing may be off, but I know that these questions are out there. And it does feel like there's more and more awareness of like, how do you serve? What are the different needs? Because it's actually very different finding, effective programming for people who are returning citizens as opposed to people who are still incarcerated. There are just so many more variables to their lives that complicate the ability to, show up for a class, and they've got other challenges. And how can we not only provide the class, but also provide resources, or at least access to resources, to say like, okay, are you having housing issues? Call this person. Are you having, employment issues? Like I know Patrick Rodriguez, who's one of who works with Common Good Atlanta. He says, here's a list of apartments that are, friendly or who don't do background checks. He's trying to get a, check, ban the box thing for applications to universities to say like, so that people don't have to put that they've been formerly incarcerated. And that's just, I guess those are just examples to say like, I think there's some great opportunities for change and conversation around these questions.
And I think that I hope that is some kind of way that we can start getting to the kids before they become returning citizens. Even if the judge is, instead of giving them mandatory service, what's that called?
Sentencing.
Community service?
Community service. Instead of giving them that, they ought to require that they go take a trade at one of the colleges
Yeah.
because we know that if you have the people that get the education while they're incarcerated, while when they get a job skill set, when they have a purpose, the recidivism rate is lower. And I can tell you from, and nobody only have to give me the stats on this. I know that the federal system is way better than the state systems because the feds take time to give you all types of trade. They make sure that when you leave there, you had an opportunity to better yourself. All types of classes, especially the lower you get down on the security level, the more classes they are. We had stock market classes and everything when I was in Coleman, Florida for 3 years. It was just a wealth of knowledge that you just want to go to these classes to learn. And when you get a person like that wants to learn, they're not going to get out and do anything to mess that up anymore to go back in. The recidivism rate goes way down.
Mhm.
Can I just add to that, Julius? Because I think you bring up a really important point, which is I want to like acknowledge some of the limits of like the work I do and the limits that I realize about it. Just to say that like it really shouldn't be the case that like someone goes to prison in order to then get this access to
Right.
college, if that makes sense. I mean, really, it is like, it really is something. I mean, education inequality and lack of funding to schools at all levels, I think is in a lot of ways the real issue here. And which is to say that, like if schools are funded, and students are interested and persons are getting educated, you're not going to have sort of the circumstances that Margaret and myself, serve in so much. And that would be a good thing, I would say. Like, I want to be very clear that I don't see like what I do as a particular kind of magic pill for the ills of society and, and the impact of the system. So I'm glad you brought this up because, again, like as much as I really find this work rewarding, at the same time, it's a kind of surface level intervention at like much deeper kind of societal and budgetary and issues of equality and equity that sometimes I think can get ignored in some of the sort of like rosy feelings about doing college in prison and everything, which I do think is a worthwhile endeavor. Don't get me wrong, but again, it is just sort of one piece of a lot of issues regarding education and equality that I think are very important.
Let me speak to this real quick because we got to get ready to close. What Julius Hall was saying actually is starting as it relates to the juveniles, and Professor Margaret can attest to that. What they're doing, she spoke of a word called the school to prison pipeline, and what they're doing now, and I'm privy to this because I'm actually in this role now, is they're doing, the courts are doing whatever they can to hinder, if you will, a young person from going to juvenile by allowing them to go through programs that will give them that last chance, if you will, to get education and also to get an employment, occupation. So there are programs right now that are in play. The mindset is shifting, although it does take a while. There are programs that are doing that. So for anyone who has a young person that is, it's difficult for them to learn in a traditional classroom setting, there are programs such as REP, Work Readiness Enrichment Program, or Deep Center, where they'll give them a media platform, and they use literature, Professor Margaret. They use literature to try to help the young people to navigate through the difficulties of life. So I just want you to know, I see you, Ron Garrett, watching. Welcome as well. And I just want everybody to understand as we get ready to close, I want Professor Margaret and then also Professor Jonathan encourage the listeners, right now as it relates to education and its importance and how it could open doors, whether you're talking to those that are still behind the wall or those that have gotten out and they are trying to sell themselves, if you will. Encourage them right now.
Okay, I'll do a quick one. I think the thing that I come back to is telling your story, and that how important it is for our whole community, our whole nation right now to hear the stories and to hear the stories of those who have been incarcerated and who are coming back out. I think those and also to hear the broader story, because what I've experienced is that every student that I've worked with, every writer I've worked with is so much more than that one story. And so how do you change the narrative? How do you complicate the narrative? How do you really own your whole story, not just the part of it that had to do with incarceration? And I do think that education gives you those tools, and that it gives you the spaces in which to share those stories and also to change the minds of others who hear those stories. And I've seen that happen because I'm in class right now with people who are, criminal justice undergrads who are taking a course right now with returning citizens. And they are saying every single criminal justice major needs to take this class because it's the first time they've really had an experience of the human side of what they're doing. So that's how policy changes. That's how our world changes, and why those stories are so important.
Professor Jonathan, as your last remarks.
Yep, I'll say this. You always have the chance to reinvent yourself. And I say this because this is very true in the kind of literal college experience. If you enter, say, a college or a university as a math major, you can change majors. If you get your undergraduate degree in, say, psychology, you could still go and do a master's in English or go do a master's in history. You have all these opportunities to change within school. But I think that this really applies to almost any state of life you're in. You always have the chance to reinvent yourself. School is a place where you can do that. And it's, I think, a place that can help you find more avenues for doing that. And education is a way that really opens up these kinds of opportunities. The last thing I'll say, and I think I said this earlier when I mentioned sometimes people who feel like they have the least familiarity with something often have some of the most valuable things to say. I'll put this in another way. Those who are often heard the least, I think, have the most important and original things to say. So that's what I would say going forward to all the listeners.
Yeah,
Marie.
and I will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, let her go ahead, Julie. Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
I just wanted to just put out that Common Good Atlanta. You can go to commongoodatlanta.com, but you can also find out about courses there. We will be starting another Clementi course cycle for returning citizens that will be on Zoom. It will be starting in January, and so if people are interested in that, they can email and find out more about that. I can also, I don't know if there's a way to put our emails in the chat, or can I do that there? I'll put mine in the chat here. But there's some really great programs out and resources around the state, I think, for returning citizens and connecting to education.
Great. Marie?
I really enjoy this the show tonight, Miss Margaret. I like what you said about I need people to hear. I really want them to hear and to change the mindsets of how they see returning citizens.
Amen. And for me, I am grateful to both of you. Margaret Barber said, great conversation. Thank you. Linda Scott said, it's never too late to reinvent yourself. And I always like to say, you may have started out wrong, but you can finish strong. And we turn it over now to Julius. Julius, close us out.
I appreciate y'all for coming again. We hope to have y'all back. I want to also mention to Miko that Julius Campbell, that's one of the things that we need to also put on the bottom of our ticker, that information for the schools where they're paying for it and it's free, because some people just need that information so that they can get that chance to better themselves. They just need that break, and that's what we're here for. And I appreciate Jonathan and Margaret for coming on, and we're going to have you all back to probably with some others, so we can continue this, so that these returning citizens know that there is hope. Because once paid, a debt is no longer a debt, and we need to make sure that they know that there's something out there for them to do. So
Absolutely.
appreciate y'all.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you
you
for the invitation.
No problem.
Okay, we will give y'all a call.
All right.
Good night.
Good
Good night.
night.